Ernst van de Hemel is the moderator of this discussion. I'll leave it to him to introduce his panelists. He's a philosopher and an activist here in Amsterdam, very much involved with the Occupy movement at the moment, and was involved with, and still is, I believe, with schijnheilig alternatives in housing in Amsterdam. I don't want to call it a squat movement. We'll talk about that. Ernst, the floor is yours.
All right. A warning, this will wake you up. I think you kind of get the drift of this style of music. This was a track, and the next slide on my imaginative PowerPoint presentation would have been a picture of them, of the infamous Zombies met capuchon, ZMK, which is Dutch for zombies wearing hoodies. Now, this music style, called techno, and it's spelled with a K, is often perceived as a sort of hedonistic, nihilistic, machine-like, alienating practice. And be that though it may, this music and going to these sort of parties was probably the first time that I was an activist. And I didn't even know it, and partly I don't remember these parties. Well, what it had to do with is that these parties, even though this music is completely alienating, and this music is very, very, well, machine-like and very loud, there is a sort of political dimension to it. There is a sort of point in it that I've only discovered after I had been going to these parties for a while. Now, what are the elements involved? These parties often, from the free techno scene, take place on squatted terrains or squatted buildings or unoccupied things. They are, by definition, free of entrance. And imagine a picture, yeah? It's a huge wall with speakers. And behind there, somewhere, is the DJ. Me, when I was 16, 17, going to these parties and finding it quite exciting, I asked, where's the DJ? The reply was, does it matter? And I figured, well, maybe it doesn't. So somewhere behind this huge wall of speakers was the hidden DJ. And second of all, where someone's original material begins and where someone's stolen material ends is kind of unclear. There's a tradition of swapping freely of records and of playing beats. So, what is this odd practice of dancing to alienating machine-like beats? The next slide in my imaginative PowerPoint presentation would have been a picture of Detroit in the 1980s, where, as you might be aware, the music style techno originated. Now here as well, in the early version, you had a sort of machine-like repetition, something that you could describe as alienating. And here as well, you had DJs who resisted being glorified. And here as well, you had people who, unaware perhaps of the political intentions, were, in my opinion, being activists. Now, and why were they being activists? Right? And I'll play you a small clip of Detroit techno out there. It's really too bad you can't see this, because the fashion in the 1980s is quite funny, actually, at the moment. So what I'm seeing here on my screen is a room, like an old factory house in Detroit, abandoned, with people dancing to it in, very funny 80s fashion. I'm not going to mimic that, because I'll make a fool out of myself. And what is well, remarkable, and I'll come back to that, is it's a very heterogeneous group of people dancing to this beat, which stays the same for about 7 or 8 minutes. And for the specialist among you, this was a track called No UFOs by Model 500, the pseudonym of Juan Atkins, who was called the godfather of techno. Right? So this machine-like enjoyment, this enjoyment of machine-like beats in abandoned, wasting spaces, right, with this rejection of glorifying the individual, originated in Detroit. And my next slide would have been a picture of Detroit, an aerial picture where you can see the damage done over the course of the 20th century. Since the population of Detroit from the 1950s till 2000 was cut in half in size. About 1.5 million people in 1950, about 800,000 at the end of the 20th century, something like that. So it was really diminishing, right? And Detroit, and that would be another picture that I would have showed you, is full of abandoned neighborhoods and abandoned factory buildings. And, well, I've lived there when I was, like, you know, as I mentioned, when I was about 16. And the impression, the wasteland of abandoned factories made upon me is quite impressive. And it is on that spot on Earth that this machine-like music originated, with people enjoying so-called, this so-called alienation in well, abandoned factory buildings. Right? And there's something very grasping about it, and I start my introduction of this panel precisely with that, because this session is called Alienation, Appropriation, and the Social City. So what you can see in the practice of techno, and what you can also see in the first rather hardcore techno clip that I played for you, is that in the most alienating way, and in the most, well, conflictual ways, it must have offended some of you classical music lovers, good taste, for instance, there might be found a way to house the social. There might be found a way in which, well, normal ways of thinking and normal ways of interacting with space and normal ways of living your life might be broken up, and a practice of, well, dancing to a machine-like repetition can become a social act. Because, for instance, the next slide, what I would have shown you, is the infamous 8 Mile Road in Detroit. And the 8 Mile Road in Detroit is a very long avenue in Detroit, very long road. And that is, it became well known not only because Eminem made a very neoliberal movie about it, but also because the 8 Mile Road is still a clear-cut definition between not only classes, but also races. There's a next picture that I would have shown you, in which you can see, and it's kind of dubious to talk about race, but it's a notion that I think is important in Detroit. And it's from the census of 2000 of the metropolitan area of Detroit. And you can see below the 8 Mile Road, you know, a really clear-cut line. Actually, it's too small. Below the clear-cut line, you see dots of blue. That's where, according to the census, Caucasians live, white people. Sorry, I'm turning it around. Beneath the line, downtown Detroit, that's where African-American population lives. Beneath the line in 2000, about 89% of the population was African-American. Above the line, you see this massive block of red, is where the Caucasians live, and about 93% of the people there are Caucasian. 8 Mile Road is a clear-cut definition between classes, between cultural backgrounds, between races. And the Detroit techno, which would have been visible if you saw the hilarious clip out of 1985, succeeded where many planners and many people haven't succeeded. That is, in bridging the 8 Mile, appealing to a group of people that share the same feeling of alienation in living in a city where lots of spaces are being abandoned, where poverty is high, where you live in a sort of wasteland. And this collective act that can be called Detroit techno, of appropriating this alienation and dancing in the ruins of what was once a prosperous industrial city, and enjoying your alienation and making a basis out of it for a new sense of community and for a new sense of interacting with each other, is what makes techno and what makes that alienating, repetitive music such a good introduction, I think, for this workshop. Because I use techno as an introduction for this workshop, not so much because, you know, I like the music, even though I admit I do, but also because I think there it's well, a sign, basically, of an attitude that I think is very important and that the three participants in this symposium all share, in my opinion. That is the willingness to see conflict as an important starting point, the willingness to resist the status quo, to break open pre-configured management notions, for instance, of how you can house the social, in order for new configurations to appear, in order for new ways of forging alliances, resisting situations that are antisocial, and basically creating new thoughts. Now, in order to start with that, you need to be able to think a point of alienation, a point of appropriation. And that might be the starting point for a new way of interacting with the social. Now, I will shortly introduce the three speakers, and if they disagree with me, I'll be happy to hear it, because this is my sketch of their practice. But far from offering a hip hip hooray, the revolution is here kind of talk, I would also like to go into the double meaning, a double entendre, of the title of the symposium, Housing in Conflict. Because starting from conflict, starting from this new point of negotiating what the social is, it might not be so easy to find your way. It might not be so clairvoyant, might not be so clear, so to speak, to know what's next. Right? At some point, some people in Detroit in the 1980s broke open an abandoned warehouse and they must have faced some criticism and perhaps some trouble with the police. What do? Right? At some point, Carl Craig, a Detroit techno DJ, was offered a multi-million-dollar record deal. What do? Right? At some point, an occupation in the Beursplein in Amsterdam saw itself confronted with elements of the social that are problematic to deal with. What do? At some point, the city of Hamburg threatened to be gentrified, and the status quo, the normal way of interacting with things, meant basically having enough money to afford a gallery. What do? So this session, I think, is very exciting because these three people present a certain practice, starting from the lack of fear for conflict, and I think with exciting windows upon an improving future, because that's the last thing I want to add. I wrote the descriptive text for this session a while ago, and that also explains why Marijn Oudenamse is still on the program, even though he accepted last Wednesday an invitation by Slavoj Žižek to discuss with him somewhere in Limburg. So he offers his apologies and said, I bring a raincoat when you talk to Slavoj Žižek. So if you're ever on a stage with Slavoj Žižek, take Marijn Oudenamse's advice and beware of the spit. That's all I have to say. But there's a second dimension in my introductory text that's in the program, and it ends, I think, with a phrase like, well, hopefully this symposium or this sessions offers hope for those who see our times as bleak and desperate. Well, if I speak personally, and if I saw what happened here yesterday at these sessions, there's a lot more hope recently. There's a lot more people talking about, something is happening, we can actually do something. So forget about that last sentence, and I hope you enjoy this symposium. We'll listen to the three speakers first, and we'll do a round of discussion and a round of questions later, afterwards. The first speaker asked to be introduced equally with a techno song, so techno haters, tough luck, and techno lovers, hooray. And when I hook this up, I'll introduce him to you. His name is Martin Reiter, and he's active for a group of activists called Es Regnet Caviar. Well, he'll explain a little bit about what they do, basically. But he's also part of a very exciting network. Oops. For a techno lover, I'm horrible with technology. Really. And he'll explain a little bit about what they do and also their relation to the very exciting and very productive Right to the City movement in Hamburg. And Martin reproached me for the way he was described in the program as part of a representative of the Right to the City movement. Well, in fact, his group of activists is part of a collective that is part of the Right to the City movement. Those of you who've ever been to an activist meeting knows how important these sort of distinctions are. We should have sound. Can we hook up the other one?
Yeah, hello, and thanks to the invitation, and thanks to Ernst for this nice introduction. I hope everything will work with my presentation, because when it was put on this computer, it was totally mixed up, and I tried to fix it before I started, but I'm not sure if I managed to do it right. Yeah, as Ernst said, I'm an activist from it's raining caviar. But I will mainly speak about the Recht auf Stadt, about the Right to the City movement in Hamburg. Yeah, and it's the same like the, like I think it was Miguel yesterday said about the Occupy movement. I can't speak for the whole movement, I just give you some impressions of this movement, and yeah, you will see. First remarks, okay. Yeah, in the beginning I'll just present two important groups to you, which were really important to set up the whole movement. Yeah, the first is It's Raining Caviar. It's a big surprise. It's an action network we built up 3 years ago. It's those squatters or former squatters, a few subcultural music clubs. It's a few social workers from a really special community center in southern St. Pauli, which is a district in Hamburg. There are queer activists. There's also, for example, the Hedonistic International, the section of Hamburg is also a part of it. So you see, techno music is also a big issue for us. Yeah, so we started with a street festival. We tried to organize our the residents in our neighborhood, because as you might, no, you don't see on this image, there were big changes in St. Pauli. There was an old brewery which was demolished, and they built up many new, basically private-owned property flats and lots of offices. So it was kind of a shock to the residents, but there was not so much going on against it. But afterwards, we decided, no, we really have to do something. So when it was finished, we tried to organize the neighborhood. And that's where our network came out of. And the second group, that's a so-called Centro Sociale. That's in the neighborhood, in the district next to St. Pauli, in the Schanzenviertel. There are some people set up a neighborhood or a residence center, an autonomous residence center, against gentrification. They also tried to organize it. Well, first they rented this place, but it was a sub-rented contract. And then they set up this center. For them, it was really important that everybody is accessible to this place. But then they also they got some trouble, because the city government then wanted them out of the building. But the strange thing is they started a competition to run a community center there. So yeah, they didn't want those people to run this center, but they wanted it in a different way. Okay, I think I have to speed up a little bit. Then I'll give you a short chronology, but well, I won't explain to you everything what happened. That's impossible, even in 2 hours, I guess. I just give you a few spotlights where I thought they might be interesting. Yeah, one important thing was Empire St. Pauli. That's a documentary, a low-budget documentary, done about St. Pauli, southern St. Pauli. The name comes from a hotel, it's the Empire Riverside, which is part of this new built district on the place where this brewery was before. It's a nice documentary where many residents were interviewed, and this was quite an impact in Hamburg, this documentary. For example, we made one public screening in a public park where about 1,000 people showed up. So it became really a big event. And at some of those public screenings came up spontaneous demonstrations against gentrification after showing these movies. So I guess it's also a big important step how we created our network. Yeah, then can go to the next picture. That's an image of our first demonstration we organized. It was a whole weekend where we had, on the one hand, our demonstration, but we also organized a first congress. The demonstration was named "The City Belongs to Everyone," and it already went through the city to many spots. There were fights upcoming, And I think that was also really important to lead the route of this demonstration to all these points where the fights were starting or up to start, because it really empowers people. If just a few people were thinking about, well, there's something going wrong here in our neighborhoods, we should do something against it, then yeah, it really empowers the people if you have a strong demonstration. In this case, there were 1,500 people on this demonstration, so yeah, it showed the people that you can do anything. Okay, what was the last? Okay. Sorry, because it was mixed up, I have to skip it a few times, I guess. Yeah, the other thing was this Congress. It was named Right to the Cities. That's where we also got the name from our network from. We made 2 days of workshops, and it was also about organizing and different stuff. So we brought together activists from other parts of the city, and during these discussions we decided I think it's not enough that everybody fights in their neighborhood, so it's more important because the whole city is threatened by gentrification, so we should focus on the whole city and we should support each other. Short after this demonstration, something happened which was really important for the whole network. I don't know if you have already heard about the Gängeviertel. It is a squat. It's actually, those were old houses. Those were the leftovers from a working class district. Actually, huge parts of the inner city used to be this working class district, but most of it was demolished already. So, but the last houses were empty. And then in August 2009, it was 200 artists squatted this place. But the interesting thing was they didn't call it they weren't talking about squatting. They just went into it and made an exhibition there. And it became really popular. So on the first weekend, there were already about 3,000 people visiting these exhibitions. And that was really important because in Germany, and especially in the western part of Germany, the most big cities have the rules that they immediately evict squatted buildings. So it's illegal to squat buildings, so they normally evict within 24 hours. So in this case, it was really important to create a bigger publicity. And the strange thing was, this is from the bird's perspective, all the buildings which were squatted, and they all have public space now in the basements. And of course, also the people moved in. In all those negotiations, they always denied that they're living there, but actually they're living there for 2 years also. And here's also another impression from this. The funny thing was that also the city council wasn't talking about a squatting action because they saw it was so famous, so they said, oh no, they are just doing an exhibition there, so we wait what's going on there. So, but then it developed and so many people were involving there, so in the end the city government really had problems to kick the people out there. Well, of course, then the big negotiations started. In the beginning, the houses were already sold. It was a Dutch investor, but they didn't have any plans, or no real plans for this building. Those old buildings are really surrounded by skyscrapers built out of glass and steel, so their plans was also to build offices there, the same type. But then the crisis came and yeah, nothing happened. So I think it was also one reason why many people in Hamburg thought, yeah, why don't you leave this artists in this place here, because we have already enough empty offices buildings. In Hamburg, we have about 1.5 million square meters of empty offices buildings. So, yeah, that's why they left them inside. But of course, then some discussion started what to do, how to own this, who should own these buildings. The city first said they have to evict because they already sold the houses. But then in the end, after long fights, the city bought them back from the investors. But yeah, that's a really long story, but I don't think I have the time to tell you the whole story. Then really short after the squatting from the Gängeviertel, it was the official beginning of the Right to the City movement. Many groups came together and organized as a network. And that's really important, that it's a network. It's not an alliance where we always have to speak with the same voice. It's a network where every group within this network speaks with its own voice. Yeah. You have a quote from the beginning. I think it should be on a different place, but I can read it to you. let's take out the rights to the city. It's on the streets, it's hanging on the trees, it's hidden under the cobblestones. And yeah, so many groups even started to exist. It was a nice thing about it. At the moment when existing groups came together to organize in a network that also empowered other people to set up new initiatives. So suddenly the initiatives popped up everywhere. Everywhere where bigger projects were planned, people came together to build an initiative against it. And also from the beginning, it were really different kind of groups. Here you have a few of them, but it was really a broad range. There were even gardeners. Also here, yeah, this Apfelbaum braucht Wurzelraum. Those were gardeners who had their small parcels, but they have to, because they wanted to rebuild a highway, so they also had to move. But there were also autonomous groups in it. I think, yeah, there's also the Rote Flora, which is used to be the only squatted center, like this old school squatted centers in Hamburg. So it was really a broad a range of groups which were active there. Yeah, okay, I think I have to do it a little bit faster. And then in the end of 2009, several huge conflicts in the town came up. There was also there is the plan to build a huge coal-burning power plant in Moorburg, which is a part of Hamburg. And part of this power plant is a long-distance heating pipeline. And it's also quite interesting, the route of this pipeline, because it always goes under the areas where the poorest people live and where they expected the less resistance. But then it came a little bit different because people started, because this pipeline was also under a park, and then people entered the trees there and occupied the trees and tried to stop the construction place for this pipeline for the power plant. So they were really successful, and they started in winter, so many people were really impressed because it was really a really strong winter, so they stayed there for the whole winter, and it also became a place where many people came to and discussions started. So as you can see, also environmental issues became an important part of our network. But also, of course, this case that where this pipeline were built shows a lot, because they should have done the route completely different through other areas, but they didn't want to. But now in the end, I have to cut it up a little bit, these people in the trees helped up really the fight against these power plants. They had to stop the plans for the pipeline system. It's not one yet, but they have to replan everything, so it lasted almost 2 years, so they're now doing their second attempt to build this power plant pipelines. But yeah, it became an interesting fight. Okay, the protest against the IKEA, I'll just show you this image. What you can see here is an abandoned warehouse. It was part of I think it was even the first mall in Germany. In the 70s, 60s, I guess, I don't know. And this was abandoned, and then IKEA came up with a plan to build an inner-city IKEA store. And they thought it would be a great idea. The residents were split it because some thought, yeah, it might be a great idea, so they will create new jobs and they will upgrade the area. But others, of course, were frightened that, of course, the rents will increase and they can't afford it. And the funny thing is, people were always talking about, okay, this place is so ugly and you really have to upgrade it. And yeah, then they came up with the plans with a building which is twice the size like this, in blue and yellow, the typical IKEA store. So yeah, it's a difficult discussion, what's ugly and what's not. And also this area wasn't really empty. It was in this building there was also a subcultural club which was really quite popular. And this building is also surrounded by smaller shops, Turkish vegetable stores and stuff like this. So it wasn't really empty, but yeah, that's the big question, how a city should look like. And within this fight against IKEA, about this planning to build IKEA, this building also was squatted by artists which were evicted at another place where they started to build office buildings. So yeah, as you see, it's, many things came together. And then about the same time, when they made the squatting, then we organized our first parade. And here I will show you a short video clip which gives you an image about what kind of people are there in this network. It's just a short clip. I hope it will work. Yeah, it's a good idea to turn down the lights.
Jetzt kommt das ständig unter Wert geschätzte Publikum. Wir demonstrieren.
Okay, sorry. I think we start again.
Jetzt kommt das ständig unter Wert geschätzte Publikum. Wir demonstrieren, protestieren, klettern auf Bäume, feiern auf der Straße. Unbequem stören wir Sitzungen, entern Häuser und Plätze, mischen uns ein. Recht auf Stadt!
Die Sponsoren laufen heiß, Verträge laufen annulliert, jeder Zurechtweisungsversuch wird von allen im Saal hier schlichtweg ignoriert.
Jetzt kommt das ständig unter Wert geschätzte Publikum. Wir sind überall, an der nächsten Ecke warten wir schon. Wir nehmen uns das Mikrofon, wir nehmen uns das Wort und repräsentieren uns selbst. Jeder Zurechtweisungsversuch wird ignoriert. Recht auf Stadt!
Die Sponsoren laufen heiß, Verträge laufen annulliert, jeder Zurechtweisungsversuch wird von allen im Saal hier schlichtweg ignoriert. Jetzt sind wir alle, die hier sitzen, also auch mal Zeugen des Skandals, der surrealen Eskapade, die da lief, recht ungeniert und neulich im Kanal.
Jetzt kommt das ständig unter Wert geschätzte Publikum. Wir sind die neue Mehrheit. Wir gestalten schon. Die Handlungsspielräume werden neu verteilt. Wir fordern eine Stadt für alle. Recht auf Stadt!
Entsetzte Körper verhandeln ihre Position. Erstaunt, verständig unter Wert geschätzte Publikum lassen die Hoffnung fahren auf die nächste Comeback-Show. Setzen noch einen drauf mit Riesenwuchten. Besetzt auf Typen und dann eine kleine Revolution.
Recht auf Stadt, die Parade!
Okay, so you've seen this image from the parade. It was in winter and it was really freezing cold, so it was amazingly that so many people showed up because it was about minus 10 degrees below zero. And yeah, that's in 2010 also many people focused more on the rents in the city because it wasn't only about free spaces or to create your own places, but we also want to really consider what's going on in the city. So, okay, one thing, there were assemblies organized for the people who were renting places from the Saga. The Saga is a housing corporation, it's the biggest housing corporation, and they were founded to provide social housing, but then they're doing not anymore. They are now a company, and the weird thing about was the Saga bought the GWG, which is another housing corporation. So one city-owned housing corporation buys another one for 500 million euros. So and afterwards, the Saga had to pay back this money. So the city got 500 million, and they used it to build stuff in the Hafen City. They used it for the privatization of the Spielbudenplatz, the second biggest square in Hamburg, and all this money were squeezed out from the renters from the Saga flats. So kind of the poorest people in the city had to pay for the luxury project. So it's kind of a class war thing. And so there were assemblies organized for those people. Then I think I have to really speed up a little bit. Another thing, for example, was the waltz parade for the Centro Sociale. It was against a parade where the people were dancing waltz on the street against high rents and also for keeping the Centro Sociale. What was really funny, what you can't see here, this parade were followed by about 200 policemen in riot gear because they expected something else. So for us, it's also quite important to do some unexpected things. Here you see a newspaper which came out of this assemblies from the people who were renting at the Saga place. So, and they also organized demonstrations in the front of other corporations. So that's, one thing was really going on. Then we also organized a huge demonstration because there's so much empty office spaces. The building you can see here is an empty office building, which is part of this new office district at the former Astra brewery in St. Pauli. So they built up new office flats and office buildings, and after 3 years it's almost completely empty. So that's why we said, okay, we want to go there and we will take it. We can make a living space out of it. And here you see one thing which I also want to present to you, that's fette Mieten parties, high rent parties. The idea behind this is that if flats are offered which are way too high priced, then people go to this showing, to the date where they show the flats, and then they just take over with a party. So they just enter with a sound system, and as you can see here, people are carrying masks and their banners, and so they're handing out champagne to the people, so it's like a nice way to not shock them too much. But on the other hand, it's an appropriation of the space, a temporary appropriation where, the people take over. And what I think what's also quite important is really it disturbs, because they can't show the flats at the moment. But so, that's a nice thing, and it's really easy to do for many people. So you just need a small speakers, some music, and a bottle of champagne, and let's have fun. So, and they became quite famous in the end. Sometimes really the people start to prepare to keep away those parties from their presentation, the flats. Okay. What else? What also became an important issue was city planning from below. So we think it's quite important to share our knowledge, because we have so many different people, and in many cases we have the first-hand information, so it's really important to share our knowledge we have. And one thing, but maybe, I don't know if Christoph will tell more about the production of desire, also a really important tool, I guess, which were improved in many of those fights, that it's like a militant research, that we talk to the residents what their wishes are. And it's not the idea of participating by choosing between one or two options. It's more like take the people to participate in the whole development process, or to first start with their ideas and then try how we can develop their ideas, or what our needs are. So this, I think, is also quite important. And maybe due to the time, the last thing is that also one thing which we do quite often practically is to capture hearings, because we don't like to be treated as objects. We're just allowed to say yes or no. Mostly we are supposed to say yes to something. Here we have an example from Now Being Q. Now Being Q, that's a group which formed after they got the information about the plans that some investors bought. I think it were about 10 houses. They totally want to renovate them, but they also wanted to demolish a few houses, and in the beginning there were no plans how the people could stay at the houses. So their plan, the idea was basically to build new space there, but then just kick out the people who lived there before. And that was really next to the area which I showed you before, this Astra brewery district. So people were quite shocked. In the beginning, the investors gave no information to the people who lived there, and there were people among them who were living there for 20, 30, 40 years or even longer. So the with the situation now in St. Pauli, it would be impossible for them to get another flat in this district because the rents are really increasing. So if they had to leave their flat, there would be no chance at all to come back to this whole district. So actually, it would be really important to the people to get some information, but they did get no information. So also we started to organize a few assemblies to organize the people to exchange our information we had. And then after, I think it was even half a year of planning, the investors decided to make an information evening. So now I will show you a short clip again, how it went on for the investors. No? Where is it? Okay, I don't know why it's not working. Wait a second. It should work actually. But why isn't it working? Okay. Maybe, yeah. Okay. Can you just open for me? Okay. Perfect.
Wir, die Nachbarinnen und Nachbarn, ein Hallo sagen.
What's the problem?
Wir, die Nachbarinnen und Nachbarn, ein Hallo sagen. St. Pauli ist, wie es immer war, selbst organisiert, eigensinnig und spontan.
In the front sitting, you can see the investors.
Die Informationsveranstaltung der Hauseigentümer Köhler und von Wagen ist ein Witz. Jawohl! Denn wir haben Ihnen noch überhaupt nicht gesagt, was wir bauen wollen. Seien Sie versichert, niemand hat die Absicht, ein Bernhard-Nocht-Quartier zu errichten. Ganz im Gegenteil, wir selbst nehmen die Gestaltung unseres Wohnviertels in die Hand, denn wir im Viertel haben die Erfahrung und
I think that's enough because it's in German anyways. He announced in the beginning, okay, we don't want to talk about it. Because we haven't had the chance to announce our plans, so we don't want to discuss your plans. So we will do like we always did it here in St. Pauli. We will do it in our way. So they just took over the whole event. That was a funny thing. They just said in the beginning, we will present our opinion. Afterwards, you have the chance to answer our questions, and afterwards we will leave. So they did. So after at this point where the investors tried to present their stuff, the people refused to listen. Then everybody left, and this thing was over. So as you can see, in some points, it's quite a good way to deal with this stuff. If they're not willing to let you participate, you just have to take over. And yeah, in the end, it became quite successful. Unfortunately, people were not successful to buy the houses. They had also an idea about buying the houses together with the Mietshäuser-Syndikat. It's a system where you buy houses collectively without owning the property. So the idea is that you just buy the houses, and then the people who live in the houses have they can decide whatever they want with the house, but they can't sell it. That's an important point about it. So to get these houses out of the speculation market. Unfortunately, with these houses, it didn't succeed because the prices increased so high. Within a few years, they increased about 10 times, I guess. So it wasn't impossible. It was impossible to to buy this house, but at least they made many successes. For example, the people who lived in these houses before are now, every one of them can come back, and they got the guarantee that their rents won't increase for the next 10 years. So as you can see, of course, there's a chance to succeed somehow if you fight. Okay, I think it's enough. Maybe if we have some more time left afterwards, I can show you some other impressions, but I think now it's time for Christoph.
Thank you, Martin Reiter. Before we go on to Christoph Schäfer, I'd like to basically point out some things that will already pop up in the discussion, basically. One thing that came to mind when I heard Martin speaking was that there is a difference, and I think a very important difference, between representation and presentation and presence. Right? And there is a first link, I think, that we'll see developing between, for instance, art and forms of activism. That right now people are getting lots of energy from being present, not telling someone to represent themselves, right? And equally, and this might be a discussion for the third speakers that we will see, and they are the artists that have set up a tent at the Occupy Amsterdam square. Because we can ask this question as well, like, what is for you the difference between presentation and representation, and what are the links between politics and art, as far as that is concerned? And Christoph, I think I've kept the crowd warm. You can begin. Some words on Christoph Schäfer, who is equally hails from Hamburg, and he's an artist and an activist, and as far as
and equally not a member of the right, not a representative of the Right to the City movement.
And equally not a representative, but however, he is part of, present representation difficulty, here we go. Christoph Schäfer has participated in Documenta with his Park Fiction project. He is the author of The City is Our Factory, and as I said, an artist, activist, and if I may be so frank, a provocateur by character. Christoph, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, this is loud. I guess we all are very hungry. I make it very short. Although I will cover 60,000 years of history, a couple of theories, and I will try to kick in some directions. Thank you. Into some directions to refer to talks that we heard before. I have prepared a sick, alienated, participatory thing. You can participate if you pay 28 euros to me, sign your name on this participatory drawing, and then you will receive this book, 157 pages, action-packed with, 300 pages and text, which I can't read out because we have no time today. I swapped the mic now. The book is called The City is Our Factory, and I think I was asked by Spectre Books to do these books, to do a book together with them. There's 5 plugs on this way to the. I can't imagine why this doesn't work. Laura, please. I can show the little pictures here, and you all come a bit closer. The first chapter is called Lefebvre for Kids. That's what we all have been waiting for, and I'm waiting to pick a fight with Don afterwards. Lefebvre for Kids. It's 60,000 years ago, roughly speaking. Human groups were walking over the planet, and they were piling up things. You know, in nature, everything is like organic, scattered, and so on. This is actually a literal translation of something that Lefebvre has written. Human groups walk through nature, put things on piles, sort them, and one of the definitions that Lefebvre gives of the city and the urban is that it is the accumulation of differences. And that's something that one might find completely normal, I think Zoran showed this painting, this image also, the foundation, the founding of the city at the river's bend. However, this is for you all. Oh, there's English translation in the book, which I don't show you, but have to tell you. So, city is condensed difference. And I think there's a consequence from that, because usually utopian, emancipatory leftist movement were more speaking in the name of homogeneity and not in the sense of this condensed differences. And if the city, as for Lefebvre, is something that is a great thing to achieve, or something like a goal that society could be heading to, I think it has an interesting consequence on political thinking. Well, the heaps grow, and now we jump to Turkey again, to the place Uçhisar in Cappadocia, where these heaps or mountains are cities, and people live in them since quite some time. The city of Ur is founded. The people of Ur looked like this. As you can see, they are all kinds of different people. So, yeah, the urban is something positive in my eyes too. I guess you like it also. And this is, because we have not much time, I don't go too deep into this issue. This is a temple in the an altar in the shape of houses, of city houses, in the Ishtar temple in Assur, which I liked, which is in the what's the museum? The Pergamon Museum in Berlin. And they're very nice, and I thought, yeah, these people still knew what an intelligent, what a fantastic invention the city is. So they built altars in the shape of cities. So to write down, the city is not the state, is the next set of drawings. Oh, I skipped something. No. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. I can't deliver the proof in this time, the scientific proof that the city is not the state. This is Kowloon Walled City, a city that was built in a territory which did not quite belong to Hong Kong and did not quite belong to Red China. And in the 1980s was the most densely populated spot on Earth, with estimated 30 to 60,000 people living in an area which is covered something like 2 blocks in Amsterdam, I would say. Completely out of the state. This is again copied from Lefebvre, a vector that shows 0 to 100% urbanization. And one more of the benefits of the city, if you don't believe me by now, points A and B are very far away from each other. If you fold this blanket, they come a bit closer. If you fold it again, they come again very, very close. And as you can see, the city and density multiplies the possibilities of the individual, and it makes intelligent, ladies and gentlemen. If you unfold the brain, it has the size of France. So, yeah, the state, public was an issue. The public, res publica, the Romans, ladies and gentlemen. We all heard about the Romans in school. And this is the stadium of Arles in the Middle Ages. The stadium, yeah, this kind of picture, if you go to buy a normal book on the history of the city, then the text would say, look, those damn idiots in the Middle Ages didn't know what to do with this fantastic structure that the Romans have put there. And this is the stadium in the Middle Ages, so as you can see, the people turned around the complete function of this building. It's now a multitude of localities in it, of situations. The stadium has been appropriated, and I like this especially because nowadays a lot of stadiums are built as under the new paradigm of image policy, and these stadiums are these kind of spearhead lighthouse projects for gentrification usually, which London will be a victim of in the next years. And you still have the same idea inscribed into these kind of spectacles. The public is sitting around this spectacle place here, right? Whoops. And all looking on the stage where gladiators are killing each other. And the city, of course, or urban space is something different. And I also find it interesting because or significant, because most buildings in Rome looked just like this until the 20s. So they were inhabited, or people were living, dwelling in them. And until Mussolini and fascism came and needed these kind of sublime ruins instead of inhabited ruins. So, which in my taste marks fascism as an anti-urban ideology. Another term that's important to Lefebvre, in fact, is the term appropriation. The city has appropriated space, and living space is, or dwelling space is, the place where appropriation still happens. We had this in Jeanne's talk, also this picture. And then there's a more utopian thing going on in Lefebvre's thought, and he founds this on a sentence by that he found in a poem by Hölderlin. Poetically man dwells, dichterisch wohnet der Mensch. However, Lefebvre was kind of driven by this idea that in a post-industrial world, after the revolution of the cities, we all would live as poets or dwell as poets. And on the vice versa, it wouldn't be possible to, it's not possible for the human being to dwell or to live without being a poet and without a relation to, without something that transcends the pure instrumental, pure functionality of that you would just need for living, like a bed and a toilet or something. So no one lives like that. People always relate with things to the outside, to other areas, different types of thoughts, religion, ideologies, and so on. So this is the background. Of course, this idea, Lefebvre gets often criticized by leftists because he so heavily takes this thought from Heidegger. However, I think his idea of the dwelling poetically was, of course, influenced by the French Bohème and by this ideal of not producing much. If you're a Bohemian guy, I mean, the greatest artists are those who nearly produce nothing, like people like Rimbaud or Duchamp. So that's like the ethic of Bohemians, is not to work really and to transform your life in a way. So I think that's behind that, and not so much an idealistic notion of transforming life into art in the sense of the life reform movement. I think a current example, or a quite recent example of this poetic dwelling is skateboarding. And this is the connection to the introduction, I would say, by Ernst. Skateboarding transforms urban things, everyday things that have a fixed function, into something very different that the skateboarder defines. And in that way, for me, the skateboard is also a kind of ideal artwork because you can use it to define your world in a different way. So it's a platform, but not just a platform, but a platform with wheels where you can say where it's going. So that's kind of, you know, all right. It turns up in a certain moment in time, I think, when certain philosophical concepts are also failing. This is not Lefebvre. This is the question, why do people like to take walks in complicated urban layouts? We dreamt up metropolises. This is something, the type of drawing you don't show to your psychoanalyst. The imaginary is part of urban space, and the imaginary produces space. Lefebvre became famous for, or he wrote 3 or 4 books on cities between 1967 and 1975-ish. And one of them is called The Production of Space, and his definition of space is not the Euclidean space, but a space produced by society, by talk, by imagination. And as we have seen, he had this idea of poetic dwelling, and the art, in a way, was resisting, a force of resistance against this utilitarialization of the industrial life, and the way that industrial capitalism reduced life to a kind of functional thing. Okay, for him it was a kind of anti-thing, was art. The problem, however, appears now, and in all the discussions about gentrification. I have shown this in 4 mountains or heaps. Here, this one says Aneignung, which means appropriation. This one says making inventions, Erfindungen machen. This one says Mehrwert, surplus value. So up to that point, I think there's not much of a problem. Making inventions creates value. That's true. I mean, that's even Marxist. Appropriation, also, the same is true for that. However, it's kind of unavoidable to create this kind of value by making all kinds of things, having nice ideas, creating networks. The problem is, starts here. Who cashes in the value? That's, on the one hand, the gentrification moment and the creative class discourse. So we have a new battlefield. And in the center of the battlefield is the city made of passions. If you had asked a mayor 15 years ago, is passion important for the future of your city? They would have said, no, we need motorways. We need harbors, we need factories. Now, somehow they have understood we need bands, we need nightlife, we need passion, we need symbols, we need all this art stuff. So, all this field is surrounded, I'm sorry to be so blunt, but we have this, I mean, this is an uninvited keynote lecture. And so this field is surrounded by different descriptions, by the creative class discourse by Richard Florida with his greedy fingers here. Then the immaterial work discourse by the post-operists, like people like Maurizio Lazzarato and Toni Negri and so on. Subcultures tell their own story, and actually from time to time in this conference I had the feeling there's one heap missing, which is like a more esoteric description of the city driven by passion. However, yeah, okay, esotericism, next picture. This is again for Ernst, dancing on the rooftop, house music. Shall we go into it shortly? I think for me also the same is I would completely agree with his theory that the appearance, in my taste, it was acid house and Chicago as much as Detroit and techno, completely changed the way how youth cultures work if the Doors still thought that they could question the Oedipal order by taking guitars, a phallic symbol, and with the right content and the right music, they could kind of confront the Oedipal order of the fathers and so on, who make the Vietnam War. If the punks stormed the stage, then with techno and acid house, things started to move in a different way. Authorship kind of went to the 5 minutes only. Okay, no problem at all. I skip your theme first. So okay, it changed. So, but since then, I think youth cultures actually construct situations. I have to skip this chapter, which is called How I Became a Neoliberal Cultural Enterprise Show of Subject. Artworks explaining themselves don't work, they say. And this is the artists talking about how they become the visual truffle pick of image capitalism. But, you know, we all know this by now. The conference was long. The final line is, the creative class discourse organizes the domesticization and colonization of subjectivity. And that's where the bohème drink, café au lait, lands in paper cups. And this chapter is, on the one hand, called The City is Our Factory, but it could also be called The City is Our Factory Canteen. Yeah, something has changed since we walk around with these paper cups full of café au lait and so on. But now with this new immaterial service, you call it whatever, economy, the cafe is the most important place and replaces the factory in a certain way. I would say a paradigmatic space, because value is produced to people. You sit here, for instance, make a joke, and this guy hears it, and with his smart technologic item, he punches the line into his advertising agency, and there's the campaign. So you have a direct connection with these cool instruments and smartphones and so on that make us to producers everywhere in a certain way. However, I have the feeling I didn't make this point clear enough yet, but I can't help it. The 5 minutes stand here. We had a picture like that in Jiang's talk yesterday. The situation when you sit at home and you don't know, is this person answering emails? Is the email private, public, political, work related, or are you shopping, selling, or watching porn? This is a part of the situation of the city becoming our factory, I think. And now I come to Hamburg and describe what happened before what Martin said. Hamburg is the neoliberal show-off city. It is a segregated city. We have a central latte zone, which is here. We have opposite the gay upmarket latte zone. St. Pauli is being marketed or branded as the maritime event zone. We have a business improvement district here. We have the Tommy Hilfiger redemption zone. That's for you, Dawn. And we have the Golden Retriever jogging ufer, or the jogging beach. And then on the other side of the river, I painted the Hafen City, and it's the maritime business zone, and their art is employed to do this job of upgrading. especially the Elbphilharmonie, which is financed in large part by the tenants of the Social Housing Agency of Hamburg, as Martin already explained. And here is a show. Sorry, Dimitri, but I can't avoid to mention that you were part of it. Subversive art in containers in the harbor city to be part of this. But I mean, Dimitri told me I couldn't imagine that a city could have such mean politics at the time. So for psychological reasons, actually this area is on the other side of the river, but for psychological reasons it's kind of slipped into this other side. Here's the creative knitwear, felt hats and wine area. And then we have, of course, a problem in Hamburg because the city is getting more and more expensive, and even the deteriorating areas, the rents rise there nevertheless. I have to skip the part where Bambule trailer park stopped the Olympic Games. I go straight to Senator for Science, Mr. Drager, handing out Richard Florida books to the Hamburg Senate, which is our government. Florida comes and gives talks. A guy called Roland Berger develops the concept Talent City Hamburg. They couldn't call it Creative City Hamburg because the Greens had called their project the Creative City a year before. Yeah, that's when you don't read those management books fast enough. The artists leave town. It could have gone on like that, but then the Right to the City movement starts. For me, it started with a person who I'm so proud to see in the audience tonight, Pelintan, in our nice boot club. It's a small, self-organized club in the formerly squatted Hafenstraßen houses. And she was giving more or less the talk she gave now, actually much longer. And she explains the concept of right to the city, which she did today again, but she described it then as something which is outside of the confines of private property and outside of the national state definitions of who's citizen and who isn't. I can hear your stomachs become gnarly already, so I will hurry up. And I have to skip all the part that Martin covered. This is the St. Pauli situation, classical rent gap situation. 360 million euros have been dug into these buildings, and then next to it the buildings that have 4 or 5 euros, 0 minutes. Well, the conclusion. People were waiting for conclusions, you know. So on the Right to the City conference in 2009, we decided how do you attack a big enemy like the neoliberal city? And we had the idea to connect spatial questions like that, those of tenants, those of artists, what is this, self-organized spaces, politics of desires, and surround the city. Easier said than done. Then the Gängeviertel came, and artists managed to use paintings as weapons. A citywide discourse started. A faked Hamburg image magazine was published. All these groups made together, Martin was saying it already, and I think, here is the answer. If you ask social questions as spatial questions, then you have a chance to connect them in a different way. And a coalition between artists and people who work in the harbor wouldn't have been thinkable 10 years ago. I'm quite sure. It was really, we have nothing to do with this type of people. And now this is happening in Hamburg, and I think it's hopeful, and the return of thinking about space is kind of important to, and the problem, however, and that's why I would like to come to this point, thank you, it is the final picture actually, this network, the Hamburg network that connected these, yeah, mine looks a bit different, that connected these different struggles, it managed to change laws. It managed, and often we get said as artists, oh, you do one project, it's just a model, yeah, but the model is always an exception because it's art, and the exception doesn't change the structure. I think that these localized struggles, if they wire up and connect, have a very good chance to gain ground on the slippery terrain of the post-Fordistic structures. And I think that it is quite important to cling your politics into space and to bite into it and to connect these struggles, and then we have a chance to change things. However, I'm not sure how to do this between cities and other cities and maybe nations, so maybe the next step of escalation is underway, and I can hand you the microphone to announce Occupy Wall Street.
All right. Is this on? Yes. Some speakers are easier to moderate than others, so apologies. All right, from well, 60,000 years before Christ till the present, I would like to ask Ilke Uitenhuis and Klaas van Gorkum to present to us something which is very much in the present, and even so much so in the present that compared to the caffeinated performance of Christoph, the sleep-deprived artists that are going to present to you now, well, bear with them. For they have been, for almost 2 weeks now, manning 24/7 the artist tent at Occupy Amsterdam. And I've been there quite frequently, and their presence is really, I think, quite crucial. And what is interesting is that this whole Occupy thing really is an open question. It still is. And people ask quite a lot of times, like, well, what do these people want? Right? And where's your program? What do you represent? Whose values do you defend? Etc., etc. And what a very interesting thing is, and I won't, well, say too much before, and I perhaps might steal some points of the next speakers. But what is very important here, I think, is that this is a very open question, and that the idea that it should be filled in, that it should be representable, and that it should be, well, marketable, so to speak. It should be something that you can wrap your head around and then place into the political paradigm. This idea is something that I think should be resisted. And I think the Occupy movement actively is trying to resist this. And so I'll hope to hear a little bit more about that, because there seems to be an intimate link between politics and art in this case. In any case, in the tent, the artist tent in Occupy Amsterdam. Really, I'm not as good as it as Christoph is to, you know, keep talking. Christoph, you will. All right.
Sorry. Don't feel shy, but you can write down and give me the 28.
Yeah, Christoph asks you to keep in mind that he's still offering his book for 28 euros. You can sign up on the stage here. So the moment when the technical things are done, I'd like to again keep in mind that dichotomy between representation and presentation when we hear about what's going on in Occupy. And bear with us, this is a project that is underway still, and a lot of it will be dealt with in dialogue. So I've agreed with both Elke and Klaas that we're going to hear some basic things, and the rest of those things will have to be developed in dialogue. So without further ado, I give the floor to Elke Uitenhuis.
Okay, well, I think you already talked about the Occupied movement and what it is. So I won't go too deep into that, but well, the reason why I felt attracted to it, because I'm not so satisfied with the representative democracy, well, about the cooperation and the political body becoming one, etc., etc. Lots of many reasons, and I don't feel really represented in politics nowadays, and also not in the media. And the occupation movement was speaking to me because of that it kind of like represents the voice of a multitude. And as I'm an artist and very much interested in democratic structures, I thought it was really like something that I needed to experience and I needed to be part of. But we were, when we came there on Wednesday, we were not there at the beginning, like the 15th of October, but we came on Wednesday the 19th of October, to see what the camp looked like. And we came there, and it was raining really hard, and I saw like a bunch of hippies, I would say, at the first place. And then I thought like, oh, do I identify with this? And do I identify with the visual language of the camp? And I didn't at first hand, but I was sitting there in a cafe overlooking the camp, and I thought like, well, okay, I can make many excuses not to go there. But then I thought like, okay, but then I'm just someone from the sideline just criticizing something that is in potential is something really interesting and something I really need to discover. So I thought, okay, I had a residency. I needed to go to Finland the next day. And then I went home on the 19th. I did some research on internet. I found a tent, an army tent. And then the next day, and then I called Klaas, I called Jonas, and I said like, okay, let's do it. So we did. We put up a tent on Thursday, and like after like 2 days, we kind of like created the circumstances in which we could work and in which we could build up something or contribute to the Occupy movement in Amsterdam and to the Occupy movement in general as artists. Why it's so interesting for me, what's happening at the Beursplein in Amsterdam. Like the Beursplein is a really interesting place because it's next to the Beurs where they're where the trade is being made of like all this virtual money, etc. And it's also the place where the I don't know, the aandelen, what is the shares are being where they started with the share exchange. So I think it's symbolically a super interesting place. And what I'm also very much interested in is like that it's a public space, and so it's open to everyone. And what we're trying to do there now, I think, well, with all these individuals coming together that don't know each other at all, now start to know each other a little bit better, but that they're trying to test how they could kind of like in a very elementary form, how they could test politics, how they can create kind of like a democratic structure together. And it's very vulnerable. It's a process, and like you all the time hear these critics of like, where are the demands and what do you want? But it's like we don't know what we want. We came there because out of like some kind of like frustration and maybe an idea or like a how do you say, like a verlangen, desire for a more democratic structure that we could engage with. So it's very vulnerable, and it's open. The square is open. When we, oh yeah, I completely forget that I have pictures. As I'm just coming from the camp, I just, like being asked 2 days ago, I'm a bit unstructured, and I have to deal with improvisation all the time in the camp, so I'm still in the mode of that. So this is how the camp looks like. It started with 5 or 6 tents I heard on the 15th, and then the day after, like 7 more tents came, and then the day after more and more, and now there are 120 tents all together, and there are different people coming, people going, and lots of people also who don't sleep there are coming on a daily basis, or sometimes a couple of days a week, to contribute to this self-organization, which is kind of like, which doesn't have really boundaries, in my opinion. So, yeah, this is the kitchen. The slides are not in the order anymore, but what I think is really interesting about coming there and trying to build something up, like the kitchen has been started, like I think the first day they were giving tea and coffee for free, and people started to give donations, and from these donations at a certain moment they could like start up building a kitchen, and this kitchen became bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's still providing food for free, and all the kitchen, like, you know, like it's all being done by donations, and it's functioning very well. It's functioning with all volunteers that are contributing a bit, you know, like it's not like maybe some people take it as a job for long hours, but also a lot of people just jump in for 1 hour or 2 hours, and they just contribute whatever they can, maybe, and from that, they're like, from all these individual contributions, like some kind of collective body is being created. And it also mirrors the idea of like this human mic, which I think is really interesting as well, that like people are expressing their voice in the assemblies, and their voice is being repeated. And by repeating the voice of someone else, the voice of the other, you're kind of like identify with the voice of the other, which I think is really an interesting way of dealing with each other, that you kind of like first identify before opposing or before responding. So, and yeah, this, let's see what the next picture is. Oh yeah, here, this is also something that I find quite striking. We have to take care of each other on a daily basis, because the camp is very vulnerable, as I said before. It's located directly next to the red light district and also in the middle of the commercial center. It's very touristic. What we deal with on a daily basis also is that there are lots of people coming into the camp that are not there for protesting, but they are living on the street. And some of them are sometimes quite hard to handle, or they take quite a lot of energy. So these people are kind of like joining us, and as we are in public space, and we have no right to say, you know, like, go away, you're disturbing us. So they are part of the camp, and we have to deal with it, and we are not professionals at all. But we have to take care of them, take care of the self-organizations that we're trying to build up somehow, take care of the general assemblies where we try that every voice is being heard there, and that everybody who would like to come in can also step in every time, like on any time possible. And so we're dealing with this, and then also, of course, with some people, like it's also lots of clubs are around, and so at 4 o'clock lots of people come in, and sometimes they start to provoke people. They just want to, like get into a heavy discussion, or maybe also a physical something. And yeah, so we are very vulnerable, but we don't want to close ourselves, because this Occupy principles are also about radical inclusivity. So how to deal with it? And in our camp we have the peacekeepers, and the peacekeepers are doing shifts from 8 at night till 8 the next morning. And well, everybody can step in for, like, maybe they can do 2 hours, or some do even like whole nights. And it's quite interesting, I think, for also seeing myself in the position of taking sometimes these kind of shifts, which some really much relate to, like, policing the territory in one way. So it's really weird to suddenly feel yourself in this role, and it's challenging and how to deal with this kind of responsibility. And what I was thinking of while doing it, because I saw lots of problem also occurs with all the peacekeepers. For example, there was like one time there were 4 guys coming in, and they really wanted to provoke some people in the camp, and they made a lot of noise, and they said like, "Hey, hippies, go away, go home," and I thought like, okay. I just go there, talk in a very soft voice, and try to get them out of the camp, like a little bit like this. And then I almost succeeded, but then 4 guys came, and they thought I needed help, so they came like, "What are you doing here?" And then these guys became suddenly very aggressive, so it turned into a fight. And then we had like lots of talks within the General Assembly how to deal with this idea of peacekeeping. And I was thinking for myself, but this is not something that, this is my personal view, that like what is the first authority that you're dealing with when you're born, and it's like your mother and your father. And so I defined for myself the role as a peacekeeper very much as a mother and a father who's trying to take care of the camp. And this, on this picture where you saw this guy giving a massage to another person in the camp who's also quite involved. This is also this guy does this on a daily basis. He's giving massage to everyone who feels exhausted. And what I found for myself, what's really important, that you really need to take care of yourself as well. Like being there, like we are there now for 2.5 weeks, and getting tired, like your presence is, I feel the presence is very important, but we're getting tired as well. So you need to, and somehow you're thinking all the time about like, okay, you want to read something and you need to be there all the time. It feels that if you kind of like fight hard enough, maybe then you will reach some sort of goals. But there are so many struggles, and it's really tough also to be there. It's like a constant alertness, constant improvisation. So you also need to step back. You also need to step back to take care of yourself, to prevent that you're like getting exhausted, but also and becoming getting unclear thoughts, but also to well, I don't know. Wait, I'm going to the next slide. Because we are there, like, this is the caring part, and now I'm going to the visual part. We set up the tent with 5 people, and from the very beginning, like lots of, like we wanted to contribute to the Occupy movement in Amsterdam, but we also wanted to invite lots of other artists and other professions that can relate to art in some way or the other, and activists and writers and etc. To come over, because what we saw also, that there was like, because I have been also at the Mars der Beschaving last, I think 27th of June, and there were like 7,000 of artists or cultural producers, etc., coming together to protest against the coming cuts. And at the Occupy movement, there's almost none, you know, like lots of people that and I also understand, because my first feeling was also like, I cannot identify with it. So we thought also we need to make a space where people can identify with, so they can enter and join somehow in one way or the other, even if the commitment is just 1 hour, you know, like, but so we started there, and it worked, because lots of people came, like, joined us immediately, and they came, and we started to produce things. Like, one of the first things we did was this banner, which is like of the logos of the banks in Europe that have been built out. And it's like, it relates, of course, to the sponsor board. And we hang it up, and there was a big controversy in the camp, because they didn't understand it. So they thought that we actually, we wanted to make a counterpart, or like we wanted to make a gesture that would ridiculize them. So they threatened to throw like paint bombs on it. And when we didn't look for a while, they were already hanging in the tree to take it down. But then the next day, it was still hanging, so we were kind of surprised. And then we also heard someone from the camp, like, complaining about the banner. And then another guy in the camp said, like, oh, it's just something like the yes man, you know, like, so. And then he understood. So. Well, this is like one of the first visual things that we did, but we also do lots of other things. This is a tent. So, like, we open up also our tent for presentations and lectures. And here we had a class of the graphic design department in Utrecht. They came over. Well, and we gave them an introduction on the revolutionary movements from Tunis till now, and it was like how, you know, like, what are the differences? What are the things that they copied from each other? And then, like, we became more and more unfocused on the camp itself. So we gave them a tour, etc. And other lectures as well, like from Marijn Oudenamse, who I'm replacing now, also did a lecture last week. Next to that, we have every day a reading group from 11 till 12, and it's initiated by Samuel Friesen. And we're reading political texts. And after, like, we are analyzing these texts, also relating it to the Occupy movement, and after that we are producing a text, and it's all like it's posted on a blog, and it's kind of like a continuous thing that we're producing, like text about, you know, and next to that we are producing. So we have like this reflective discourse in our tent. The program is on www.artistsinoccupyamsterdam.nl, and next to that we're producing things, and we're producing things in a way that kind of like mirrors the way that everything functions in the Occupy camp. Like we share the ideas, like one has one idea, like another one joins in, and et cetera, and collectively we try to build up some some projects, which I don't have images of yet because we're still very much in process. And I hope this process will last forever. Okay. That's it.
All right. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite the speakers and Klaas, I think, on the stage.
Get all on stage.
Yes, what I'd like to do is I'd like to try to wrap it up a little bit before the final wrapping up of the symposium. So we've got about between 5 and 10 minutes of discussion. And, well, that's just the way it is. So apologies to the speakers that the time is almost up. No, apologize to the speakers, except to Christoph then. But the first question would be, and that would be basically a reflection, because what we've seen is we've seen two speakers, two movements basically, both Christoph and Martin referred to the Rights to the City movement, which, as I understand it, has as a strong point that it kind of can connect different initiatives without claiming them under one identity, and enables them to present their own points. And on the other hand, we have the brand new Occupy movement, which is also geared towards, well, not representing people, but letting people present themselves. So I'd just like to ask Christoph, first of all, you mentioned something on the possible differences between the Occupy movement and the Right to the City movement. In any case, you said, well, maybe the right to the City movement is very suitable for connecting different visions on the city, and perhaps the Occupy movement is, in any case, better suited to connect different cities.
Hello? Hello? Yeah. Well, we have difficulties in Hamburg because our Occupy movement is weak, because Right to the City was strong for 2.5 years. So Occupy was basically started by people who didn't have a clue what was going on in town, so that was not the best start. So but I think it's of course something extremely hopeful. Because I think even the blurry situation I must say, this blurry situation where you don't know where is this heading to, and I think revolutionary moments are actually marked by a certain by something that is not completely lined out like a Leninist. I'm very much opposed to Dmitry, Leninist, by a Leninist Kader party stuff. But actually I feel like everybody's so tired and waiting so much for food that it somehow goes into my...
Well, we could have a general assembly about it, and we could have a consensus about whether we go and eat or whether we ask. But
or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. No, but I think what is good is, on the one hand, to find a way to start to move in a way that is somehow unexpected, which is what people do, because we don't have much choice. We can't put a general strike into the factories anymore, because most of us are somehow self-employed, little pity entrepreneurs, stuff like that. It's not so easy to work with the classic tools of militant working class movements. For me, there are many connections, but the good thing in the Right to the City movement, I think, is that you get a grip, because if your flat becomes a place of production, then the fight for rent is basically something like and the fight for centrality in the city, which marks all, even especially the most horrible talks that we saw. I mean, the most horrible themes that we saw the very nice talk by Dawn, for instance. It's where the central issue is, of course, how close to the city can you stay? I mean, New Orleans is basically after the Hurricane Katrina has been cleared, and people are not allowed to return to their social housing. So the fight for centrality in the city happens on different levels of class at the moment, and it happens in different cities, but it is the same question in a way, because these cities and the centrality of the city is a productive factor these days.
Yeah, if I can connect
so
this.
if Occupy is there, it's in the right spot.
Yeah, well, and that would be, I think, a question to Klaus. It would be a question in two parts, so to speak. One is, what's it like to do work at the Occupy camp, right? As an artist, but also in this tent. And secondly, how do you see the Occupy camp connecting itself to different groups in society, different practices? And well, connected to that is basically this conference is about housing the social, and as Elke just explained, the Occupy movement can be seen as, well, a presentation of the 99%, people that feel kind of left out in methods of representation. And immediately afterwards, you saw the presence of people that required care, the mother and father figure. And do you see that as, how do you see the combination of that? Does it distract from the political point that you're making? Or do you see the care for deranged people or addicted people at the camp as part of the political statement?
Okay, let me take those questions step by step. I'll skip the first one, just remind me of it again later. So before delving into the care part of the question, I'd like to respond to how we try to connect to stuff that's happening outside of the camp. Already, I think, when we arrived here and I entered into the symposium, there's at least 6 of you that have spent a night with us in the tent. The tent is visited by people that don't just participate in the program, but actually take part in building up this community that has grown from the initial 5 to something bigger. They're poets, artists, a composer, sociologist, even a theologist, if I get it correctly. No, you are not a theologist, but you told me that you were.
I'm just a moderator here.
The one thing, though, that we haven't encountered yet, but I think we really miss, and it's something that I miss because I've seen it in Plaza de Catalunya in Barcelona. There was a very, very strong presence of very young architects in the tent camp there, and I miss that very much. So actually one of the more important reasons why I'm here is to ask you, please come, join us in the camp, urbanists, architects. I think we miss those kind of perspectives. I think that joins in a little bit also with what Christoph said. There is quite a big difference in the right to the city and the Occupy movement, in the sense that the right to the city is very much about the city, so it includes much more of those perspectives. And the Occupy movement is, on the one hand, very vague, but also very, very broad in its ambition of political and social issues that it tries to tackle. And it could help if we have more specific perspectives in that.
And the care part.
And the care part. I have to check what time it is. Because I am a young father that has to pick up my son before he goes to bed. So I have about 5 minutes. One of the most difficult parts of being in the camp is the care part. Not just for the crazy lunatics that visit us, but also the care for each other. The fact that we have to, spend 3 hours looking for petrol for the generator that gives us electricity. Just the things that you take for granted in your daily lives. Water, electricity, heating, food. Is something that becomes a really difficult chore. But it also becomes a kind of a political project, because we're all in it together, we're helping out each other. I have to say though, after having spent about 2 weeks in the camp off and on, we swap, because obviously we have work at home. It is very hard, it is very tough. And what I find very tough is that I have 2 domestic issues to take care of, the one in the camp and the one at home. So a friend of ours, Samuel, who spends a lot of time in the tent, said it very nicely. First of all, it is interesting to see these domestic issues as being very important in pushing the political aspect of our endurance there, but we have to watch out for it not to become a kind of a microcosm of inconveniences. It is, when you're there, it's very easy to all of a sudden let the camp become your small world, and you stop looking beyond it and you deal with the everyday problems of keeping it up. And there is a lot of interesting and inspiring knowledge to be gained from that, but it helps from time to time to look up from beyond the camp and realize that you're not part of Occupy Amsterdam, but you're part of a global movement with camps everywhere, and that you're also working towards something that goes beyond just daily life, I suppose.
Cleaning your own street, yes.
Cleaning your own street.
All right, I'd like to open it up a little bit to the floor. If there are questions, then there are people with microphones walking around. Yeah.
Hi, I've spent a lot of time at Occupy LA and Los Angeles, and we have a very similar problem with the homeless. And it's only in the last week that people have actually realized that the homeless are speaking to the homeless and working with the homeless is actually part of the movement forward, right? Like no one ever talks to the homeless, I think, in LA or anywhere else in the world. And so part of the effect would be to include them in the conversation to the degree they can be included, because there's many different kinds of homeless people, right, as we know. And some are really mentally incapacitated, and others are quite cognizant and very politically aware. So kind of bridging that gap between the homed and the homeless seems like a big part of this struggle. I'm wondering if that's where you guys are headed as well.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I see already a difference also that people are getting less tense about, because in the beginning, of course, no one was, they didn't knew how to deal with these people that sometimes are psychotic or drug addicts or anything else. Or, but now I see that because they're like we're seeing each other every day, so like connections are being made. And the guy, for example, who's like in the first week he was like only screaming. He now, like yesterday, I saw him cleaning the toilets, and I thought, you know, and he's conversations are starting up on different occasions as well. I see a difference, and I see also a difference in tension, like with everyone in the camp. It's like, because in the first time, I think because everybody expected that the square was going to be cleaned in a week, and now you see it becomes something on a long term. Like the mayor just said that we need to move on the 1st of December because of the Dutch Sinterklaas, but we are going to invite him for an assembly. But yeah, I see a difference. I see it becomes more normal in a sense, and it's good because now we can like start also more effectively use our time and energy for things that we are really there for as well, not only by trying to kind of like balance it, but also kind of like, yeah, so.
Thank you. I suggest that you consider declaring yourselves to be the Dutch Sinterklaas this year.
Nice. Okay, and I'd like to ask one final question before we move on to the closing part of this 2-day symposium, and that will be to Martin. What I find very fascinating about both these initiatives is that they somehow, it's not for nothing that all the people on the stage here found it difficult to say, I represent this organization. Right? Every single one of them said, well, I'm here, but I'm not really representing, I'm just... And you can really almost see that there's sort of, people are struggling to find a common language. Right? People are trying to find words, people are trying to find ways to express this. And I was, my question to you would be, in this Right to the City movement, there are many different activists, many different activist groups. Some might be more artistic than others. Some might be more politically engaged than others. Some might be completely anarchist and would disagree with, well, doing a legal gallery, for instance, right? Or how do you negotiate these different well, strands and these different opinions, right? Because that seems to be the strength of the Right to the City movement, that there are not these isolated islands, but that somehow there is a common language. But at the same time, I feel like people are still finding it and discovering it.
Yeah, I think the solidarity is really an important point. And of course, there are conflicts. So it's not that everybody is happy with what the others are doing, but yeah, of course, it's important that everybody does their own stuff, so that you really rely on what you're doing, then you really want to do this, but the others are accepting this, and you hope that it will, or I think one principle is, for example, that we don't judge what others did in public, for example. So it just happened once, but I think everybody was really convinced that we shouldn't judge each other in public. So we have our discussions, and of course there's several issues which haven't come to an end. But up to now, I think it's really important to support each other, and that's what many people saw, what they discovered. It is possible if you support each other. Then we have, because not all of those fights just popped up, but many of them, some people were already busy on the same topics for years or decades sometimes even. And suddenly you see, if you support each other, then so many things are possible. And of course, it's a nice thing when you have success. So that makes it easier, because then even those in the beginning, of course, many people doubted and, come on, these artists, that's not really squatting what they're doing, but in the end they succeed. So they are still there after 2 years, and they're still squatting there, and they live there all the time. So yeah, many people were convinced that it's possible. So I think, yeah, of course, you have to be somehow open-minded, but still believe in what the others are doing and support each other. Solidarity, I think that's the thing. Yeah.
Thank you, and unfortunately there's not more time. If you want to talk further with any of these speakers, you know where you have to be after this is done. Christoph will be near his book. The two speakers from Occupy Amsterdam can be found at Occupy Amsterdam, and the Right to the City movement in Hamburg is open to whoever wants to participate. But I would like to just close off with these remarks. What we've seen here, in my opinion, is really quite the future, I'd say, in the sense that in the past year I've seen, well, politically engaged artists and artistically engaged activists really finding common ground in either the Right to the City movement, or they are very stimulated, and as a result they get very tired by their enthusiasm for the Occupy movement. And there is something in this presence, this unnegotiable presence of, well, a people, the 99%, but also, I think, the work of an artist, that somehow seems to offer a new beginning with all this violence of budget cuts and the, well, increasing demand on the artist to defend himself in the language of a market economy. So you can really see a new point starting, in my opinion. And perhaps the idea, or perhaps the beginning point, would be exactly to demand, say, this is a new point, what we've got going here. Where we're going to go, how we're going to do it, it's not clear yet, but this is a point that we've got. I feel like that's something that these speakers share, and that's also something I try to illustrate with my techno point. Someone just said, well, for me it was acid house as well. Well, unfortunately, or fortunately for the techno lovers, between 9 and 10 today there will be a techno DJ, DJ Dansor, whose abstract and perhaps alienating sounds are, I think, a very good illustration of this politically engaged art that we've been talking about. So that's the program from 9 to 10. I now give the floor, first of all, I thank very much the speakers, and apologies